my name is Ejaye McComb. I'm with Digitcom, and this webinar is on troubleshooting VoIP. We're calling it session 1. The truth is, if I was designing this, we would probably have many sessions, like 5 of them. But what we're going to do is we're going to try and divide them into 2 sessions and give you some, I would say, definitely this session, very high level troubleshooting advice. And then the next one, we'll get more level or more the low level. And like I said, if it was left up to me, we'll have a couple of follow-ups at some point where we get even more low level than that. So the problem is, as you guys know, or anybody who's in the IT field and has ever dealt at all with VoIP or really networking in general, you could take this topic, honestly, I think, you know, conservatively speaking, you could spend about a week on it in a classroom if you wanted to. And then you probably cover it fairly in depth. But to be useful, like we have to crawl through a certain amount of sort of mundane high level stuff before we can get in and actually say anything useful. And so that's kind of the problem is, how do I leave you with something that's useful and that you can actually take away and do something with after each of these sessions, but only do it in a half an hour. So it's a little bit tricky. Not to mention there's a mixed audience. Some people will have lots of VoIP experience and some people very little. So the idea behind this one is, spacebar worked very well, is to give you, I'm going to just jump right past this, is to give you an overview of voice over IP, sort of what it is. I think it will actually somewhat, even for the most experienced people, I think it will actually kind of make some more sense. I think it'll somewhat demystify it. I won't spend more than 5 minutes. I want to talk about how it works, learn some of the vocabulary surrounding VoIP, and then talk about the components that affect the quality, understand the bad symptoms the symptoms of bad quality, look at a network diagram, and do some high-level hunting for likely causes. So the previous slide I try and give at the beginning of every webinar. I just want you to know I am from Digitcom. Of course, we've been in business since 1991, and we specialize in solutions-based selling. So that is selling you something that's a useful solution to you. It may or may not involve a phone system, but it most definitely involves communication and fitting into your business process, not just peddling a phone system or a phone system replacement. And of course, in bringing value to customers, this webinar is part of our Providing Value series. Okay, so then the mission next time around, so part 2 is going to dig deeper. And so it will be looking at specific tools and tricks that'll help you troubleshoot VoIP. So it'll take it certainly to the next level. We'll learn how to rule out components and rule in components. It's an interesting methodology that I use a fair amount. I think a lot of us in troubleshooting do use that methodology. We just don't know that it had a name. So it's called rule out, rule in. And it's interesting. And I think we all do it subconsciously. And then lastly, we'll talk about tools for VoIP troubleshooting. So again, that is in the next session. So that will really leave you with takeaways that once you've got the foundation of today, plus the next session, which will be in 2 weeks from now, you should be able to actively do something. Okay, so what is voice over IP? Well, we all know what it means. It means carrying voice packets and voice as a service over IP, right, over the internet protocol. And so it's known as packet switching versus circuit switching. So in the old days, you know, when I picked up my phone and I dialed a phone number, it went to a piece of equipment which put together 2 circuits and then outpulsed a bunch of numbers to the central office, which heard my digits or detected the digits depending on what technology it was, and they literally switched a path to the next PBX or to the next phone system at the next adjacent CO, who then did the same thing and so on and so forth really rapidly and put through a phone call for us. Now, of course, they're IP packets. So we send them over the internet or over our network, first of all, then the internet to what's called an ITSP, right, which is an internet telephony service provider, and then it routes it to the PSTN. So what you need to know about this is we use, for the most part, SIP to do this. There are a number of technologies. There's one, for example, called H323, which is quite often used with stations. with certain phone systems. Their private trunking is done with H.323, but SIP is sort of the ubiquitous, certainly most popular technology out there. It stands for Session Initiated Protocol. And what it basically is, what differentiates SIP from any other language or protocol, so to speak, is the fact that it's just a dialogue. So it's just at the very beginning of the phone call is really what's SIP. So it's this dialogue. If I was to meet you in a room and we had, lock eyes, that might be the very first part of our dialogue. We begin to move closer so that we can speak amongst all the parties in the room. That's the second sort of protocol that we might follow. And then from there, we kind of try and determine, especially if we speak multiple languages, which language we're going to use to connect. And even the cadence. When you're looking at somebody, if you're speaking too quickly and they're not following you, you slow your cadence of speech. And so we basically decide in the first, let's say 30 seconds, 1 minute, how the conversation is going to go. And so that's what SIP does. So that's that part of the conversation, that dialogue, determining what it's going to look like. From there on in, there's this thing called real-time protocol. So it actually takes the packets, the actual voice, the meat and potatoes of the conversation, and it sends it from place to place. And so that the RTP traffic is common amongst other technologies as well. So SIP takes care of that very first conversation, if you will, that introduction to each other and figuring out the speed and so forth. And then from there on in, RTP, so again, the voice itself follows the rules that we've come up with using our protocol. And so that's what makes SIP what it is. It's really no different than other technologies. So if you're using H.323, for example, or if you're using video, for example, there are real-time protocol packets going back and forth after that initial unique protocol is decided on. Okay, so RTP sampling rate, the compression, are decided in the initial dialogue. So that's sort of, I'm likening that to the cadence of the conversation. Okay, so all that's decided on. But here's the ticket. RDP packets use UDP. So RTP is UDP. I know it's a lot of acronyms, but user datagram packets, if you're not familiar with that, if you haven't programmed a firewall before, there's two fundamentally different types of packets, and those are UDP and TCP. So UDP packets are connectionless. So that means that when a packet gets sent to point A to point B, it's really ripping fast. There's no acknowledgement made by the other party. It's just sort of sent at a best effort basis, and we hope that it gets there. It needs to be fast. We need to use UDP, because if not, if we were using TCP or other technologies and waiting for an acknowledgement every time that a packet was sent, then this talking that I'm doing right now wouldn't get from point A to point B quick enough. Okay. So if you think about it, it's getting there just fast enough right now to be acceptable to your ear. Maybe it's not always aligned with the video, and my mouth isn't exactly the same speed as the audio that you're hearing, but it's enough to be acceptable. If we were to take that and slow it down by 100%, so make it twice as slow, if you will, or half as fast, however you want to look at it, that's what it would be like if we were to use something like transmission control protocol, where it acknowledges every single packet that goes through. So it's just not very efficient, and that's why we do it. So it's not that people didn't care or that they didn't have a better technology to use. It's just for speed's sake, we use UDP. And so if some packets don't make it through, right? Just they don't get there. So in summary, voice packets are not reliable. All right, and so we've got to take precautions. You and I need to take precautions to make sure that they get through, that they get there reliably, and that they get there at roughly the same speed as one another. Okay, and that's really VoIP in a nutshell. Like I said, under 5 minutes, roughly around there. So I want to very quickly compare it to a computer browser to a voice call. The reason is because one of the things that we hear a lot from customers is customers say, my VoIP doesn't sound very good, phone calls breaking up, and so on. No, it can't be my internet, because the internet's working well. Like it's on every web page loads quickly and reliably, and you enter the technology here. My remote desktop works very well, and that's lovely, right? And I believe that, but there's a very big difference. So web page traffic, HTTP traffic, is almost always one way. If you think about it, so I typed in yesterday, this is the day of the big Raptors parade, typed into sportsnet.ca, I just typed in sportsnet.ca, I hit enter. This page came up in, I don't know, like maybe 1.5 seconds, right? And my internet's not that wicked fast. This top bar here took the longest to load because it's a widget with all kinds of scores in it. So it had to download that component, whatever it might be. It's probably the largest single file in the entire web page. And then of course the web page assembled all the pictures, which it receives separately. It uses transmission control protocol. So as Sportsnet is sending me these pictures, my browser is going back and forth with Sportsnet saying, yeah, I got that. Yeah, I got that. No, I didn't. Send another one, please. And before you know it, it assembles the page. The page assembled in a weird order. In fact, I think the Astros GM offers blueprint for Blue Jays. This article down here, I think that's the one that came up first, if I remember right. And then the main Raptors picture up in the upper left, I believe, came after that. It doesn't much matter, but the point is it didn't all render at the exact same time. And we don't care about that, right? Because as long as the page assembles itself, that's all that matters. In the case of voice, however, so moving right along, in the case of a voice call, it's two-way traffic, right? So I'm receiving, right now I'm not receiving a whole lot because you don't have your audio turned on, but in general, I'm listening to you and I'm speaking to you. And even if I'm not speaking out loud right now, the phone's still capturing the ambiance of my office here. Got the window open, you can hear birds cheeping. All those little wee pieces are still being encapsulated and still being sent to the other side. So it's very much a two-way conversation. It needs to be expeditious, as we talked about, so it needs to be in UDP. And so, and the exact order, and this is the big thing, the exact order in which the packets get to the other side matters. Because if the packets are sent and they get out of order, because one packet took one route to get to, in this case, the Zoom server that's rebroadcasting packets and sending them out to all of you. If it took one path and then the next packet took another path, like what was happening downtown core yesterday, a lot of different paths, some clients having different voice over IP issues just due to clogged data circuits. So as it's doing that, what will happen is the receiving party will say, listen, I got those packets, but they're out of order. And because we're a non-acknowledgement, we're a connectionless protocol, I'm not going to ask you to reset it because that's out of the question. We don't do that. So instead, I'll just get rid of it because you don't want me to play it after the last packet. That doesn't make any sense. So I'll get rid of it. So you can imagine now, now that I've described that, exactly what that sounds like. When your packets are out of order or you've got a bad connection in general, it sounds like dropping, it sounds like, you know, a cell phone under a bridge or in a parking garage, where things are not just garbled, but completely missing at times, at points of the conversation, okay? And so that's what a bad VoIP call sounds like. So like I said, so they're fundamentally different. This one here doesn't care what order it renders the browser in. It sends acknowledgements back and forth to make sure that everything got there, and it's lovely. So the internet always looks good, right? But voice doesn't always sound good on that same connection. And that's the reason why, okay? We could dive into it deeper, but that's the gist of it. So the components of a voice call, I just want to go through this really quickly to remind you of how complicated it is, and then we're going to look at a network diagram. So the components of a voice call. This is getting kind of semi-detailed. I didn't actually talk about, you know, the interface on each of these devices, but here's a phone that's in front of me here. So you can see right here. So from the phone itself, let's assume that the phone is a good quality phone, right? You got to assume certain things in life. What are the components that could fail between this good quality phone and our good quality ITSP, right? Or internet telephony service provider? Well, the first thing is this cord, right? So you got this cord, it goes into the wall. The wall there has built-in wiring. It goes back to a wiring closet. What does that look like? We don't know, but we sure hope that it's good. But that's another point of failure, right? If the wiring itself is putting noise on the call, so to speak, I don't mean literal noise, but I mean losing packets, causing retransmissions from your telephone or your computer, or whatever the case may be. Your computer's not going to notice, but your telephone will. Okay, so you get through all the cabling into the back room there, and then we got our network switch. Our network switch, we plug in there, and so do 24 or 48, 23 or 47 other people, right? So depending on the size of the switch is what I'm getting at. So then we all compete for usage of that switch, right? And then what's even funnier then is our network switch quite often uplinks to another network switch. And do you think it does it at 48 times the speed of the individual connections? No, no, no. It does it at a reasonable but much smaller amount, right? So in other words, it's a bottleneck. We've got all these devices speaking, and then we typically take it down to a smaller, pipe and send it into another switch where we compete, and then go into, let's say, a gateway or router. So the next thing then is our gateway or router. Hopefully it's a good quality one, but that's your edge device at the edge of your network. So that provides you usually with your DHCP. So you're addressing for the network. It provides quite often there's a firewall built into it, and so forth. So we've got a router, and then the router usually goes to a modem or a media converter. So in the case of DSL or something, it'd be a modem. In the case of fiber, it would be a media converter. And then finally, let's assume all that went well. We get out to the ISP, if you will, to the internet, so to speak. And the next thing we touch then is our internet service provider's router or their gateway. So the one that faces us and routes all of our traffic to get it out to the internet at large. Then finally we hit the internet. I put it in capitals because it's such a big unknown. And again, yesterday's traffic really proves that. The internet generally works awesome, but once in a while it can be thrown off kilter by the right event. Then we get into the ITSP's cloud. So we go through the internet, through several providers, different routers, and we get into the internet telephony service provider's cloud, and he, she, whatever, it links us to the public switch telephone network, so to the PSTN. Okay, so a lot of pieces, not to overwhelm you, but I just think it's important that you're realistic with yourself and you understand how much is involved. So you can't always slam your fist on the counter and say, it's because our switches are slow, we need new switches, I'm going to write out a requisition for new switches. No, probably not. Look at how many elements are involved. And I'm not stretching this here. I could have gone into more detail. There are patch cords between the network switches after all, and so forth. But we're just talking in general terms. There are a lot of different factors. Okay. I'm trying to keep my eye on the time. Okay, so collecting information. So the very first thing I want to talk about is a network diagram. This one's one that I put together. You can see I didn't miss my calling. I'm not an artist, that's for sure. So maybe the technical field is best for me. So here's a diagram that I put together. I would recommend to each of you, as a troubleshooter, this is what I carry around, and I've got all kinds of neat diagrams through this, and I put it on scraps of paper, and then I staple the scraps of paper into this book. But I draw a picture. Generally, if it's really easy to understand, I don't bother. But generally, I draw a picture of a person's problem. So I call you and I'm talking to you and I draw a picture. In fact, I can see two names on this list. I won't name them, won't call anybody out. But I know for sure in my last notebook that one or two of those people's network diagrams are in there, in my own pen and handwriting, okay? So I would suggest you come up with this. The reason why I'm showing you this is so you can see the level of detail that I draw it to. It's not a huge level of detail. I didn't put in 23 computers because the customer has 23 computers. I didn't go nuts. I'm just drawing this out so that I have an idea of what it looks like. And when we look at this particular diagram here, let's see, I can get the pointer. Ooh, isn't that cool? So, so we've got the computers here attached to a switch. You'll notice too, this switch is different than this one here, and the phones are attached to this data switch here. So it tells me that in this particular case, the day that I was drawing this diagram, maybe I was drawing a split network where we have all of the voice devices sharing one switch and all of the data devices sharing another one, because it sure doesn't look like they're overlapping with each other at all. And then they each go to the firewall and then the modem. And usually I write in the customer's firewall. So a customer says to me they've got a, whatever it is, a Meraki or something, I write that in. I just do that because later on when I'm troubleshooting, I may find out, for example, that those Merakis have a problem with such and such, through some of my research. So if I've been diligent enough about writing that down, then when I go back and check my notes, I can go, holy smokes, I just read an article on how those things are problematic with whatever, or this setting affects them. So I should have the customer clean that up. And I'm not second guessing myself. Usually the same with the modem and so on. And what I did here is I draw the public internet, and then you can see I put in ITSP, so our SIP provider, right, our internet telephony service provider, and I have blown that up. This is an Amazon picture. It just shows our particular infrastructure. And I've blown that up to here so that you get an idea of what it looks like, just so you don't think that all is always perfect in the ITSP realm either. It's not. There's a lot to that. They have their sophisticated internet uplinks and usually redundant routers. And then they go back to redundant firewalls. So everything is cross-connected twice over. And then they go to a SBC. I've drawn this incorrectly. They would go to an SBC and then back and forth to a soft switch. So that's just my error. And that's like, let me be clear, that's wrong. That would never be the right configuration. But you get the idea. I just wanted to draw out for you what it looks like. Now, a person's house, for example, their handhelds, their soft phones, their phone goes into a switch, and then chances are pretty good that their computer is on wireless. I think that that's relevant because, again, that's the media. That's the media that they're using. So they tell me, gosh, we've got this problem with our home workers. Whenever they're working from home, it always sounds terrible. You know, Digitcom, please tell us what's the problem. Well, gosh, there's an awful lot going on here, right? So you share a picture of your phone system and your router and your modem, and then there's the public internet, and then this is somebody's house. And maybe they've got a VPN, so we might draw the VPN in here. But immediately I start to think, gosh, they're using a soft phone. Okay, so are they using a wireless card on their laptop or a wired card? I only ask because my own laptop has a bad wireless card. It actually doesn't even work well for web. So I mean, it's very obviously bad. And I plug in everywhere I go. I plug in with the cable. But it's been like that for a long time. It's not an old laptop. So go figure. But my point just being, wireless, for example, is a big killer, and that's quite often what's being used at somebody's house. So before we go to the obvious and we circle the modem and the internet and basically say to the user, look, you don't have enough internet, or it's because your kids play Fortnite or something like that, before we go and blame it on what seems like the obvious, do a bit of research first, right? And draw the picture out. Draw out what kind of device are they on? How do they use their device? Like me right now, I'm speaking to you on speakerphone. That could be half the problem there. Maybe it isn't even an internet problem so much as it's the phone speakerphone quality, right? So I'm just saying that you want to draw your network out as realistically and as much detail as you can to help you completely isolate the problem. Then the second thing I'm going to say about this before I move on, and we're going to get into this in great detail in sort of lesson 2, session 2, is draw the circle. So I'm going to leave you with this thought real fast, and then we'll leave this page because we got lots more to do in 9 minutes. As I said, not a lot of time to talk about a complicated subject. So I call it draw the circle. I don't know if anybody else does. It's a weird model. It's what I use in my own brain. When I look at a problem always looks huge until we make it into smaller pieces. And so I usually start collecting info. I'm going to show you in the next screen how I collect the info. So I draw the picture. Then as far as I'm concerned, the circle is around the entire picture. So it could be anything. I don't know what the problem is, but it could be anything. And then I start doing strategic tests that help me rule things out. So that rule out, rule in that we were talking about earlier that we said we would do in the next session, it's exactly the process I use. So basically, I test individual components. I collect details first, but then just to be sure, I go and test the individual components that I'm able to test to rule them out, until it comes to a point where I can realistically say, okay, I can circle this site. I know for sure it has nothing to do with the remote worker per se, because multiple remote workers are having a problem. So it's unlikely they all have the same problem. So I'm going to rule that out due to a number of tests that I've done. I verify with my ITSP. They've got 1,500 customers. I'm the only one complaining at the moment. So I know their systems aren't down. That's not the problem. I'm going to rule them out. I'm giving you a very generic, I hope you would do more research than that, but anyway, I'm just trying to rush things along. So I would rule that out, and then I can circle this site. And then from here on, I might have a second internet connection that I can use as a point of reference, or I may have other switches that I can have the customer plug their phone into to make sure that I'm not fighting between data network and voice network, so that I can be sure of the path of voice out of my facility. So then I can rule that out. I would also want to test the PBX, the actual phone system. Who's to say that it doesn't have a bad network card in it, right? It has happened before. It's not impossible. So how would I test that? So again, I use tools to make my circle smaller and smaller and smaller. And again, we'll go through this in great detail in the next session. So moving along, more collecting info. So step 1 of collecting info, in my opinion, do a network diagram. Step 2 is actually ask for incidental information. Okay, I like using this format: what, when, who, and what else. So what happened? So somebody said, oh, I could hear myself talking. All right, sounds like echo to me. So write down echo. All right, so when did that happen? So what I do is I actually give customers a spreadsheet, because they can't call me every time it happens. Or I say, listen, send me an email and tell me about it. I'm not going to get back to you on every email. Just rest assured that at the end of the day, I'll compile the stuff into a list. But I suggest giving them a format to follow. I need to know what the symptom was. I need to know who you were talking to. I need to know when it happened. And then if you could kindly give me any other detail you think is relative, okay? So anything at all, relevant, pardon me. So in this case, the call sounded fine at first, but then midway through the echo began. I don't know why that happened, but and then I hung up and they called me back and it was fine. Who knows what the case is, but I want to know what the details were in, 50 words or less. Okay, the second one, I'm just spitballing these. Speech broke up. It was kind of garbled, and then the call dropped. Uh-oh. When did that happen? June 17th, 10:01 a.m. And it's interesting, I had a complaint from extension 208 just before that at 9:30 a.m. That's interesting. Okay, and then who? Well, I don't remember who it was, but some 905 number called me. It's from the 905 area, and it was at extension, I was at extension 208 when I took it. Interesting. And then, of course, again, what else happened? So the beginning of the call was bad. Thought they were on a cell phone. Eventually it dropped and they called me back, and then it wasn't much better. That's interesting. So they called you back and it wasn't better. So it probably wasn't the route then that between our ISP necessarily and our facility, because a different route would have been chosen probably for the second call. So that's interesting. And yet it was consistently bad. So, and I love too when this happened, June 17th. That's interesting. The reason is, and let's get into this one. The reason is because of this. It's using the data. So I looked for correlations, and remember, correlations don't equal causation. So for more on that, Google that saying. It's cool and it makes sense. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but quite often it points you in the right direction. So that simply means that we put this information together and figure out what are the commonalities here, like what's going on. So does it usually happen at a particular time of day? I don't know, but that's pretty compelling so far. Let's say those are the only 2 calls I collected all day from my company. That's really compelling. I'm really interested to see what happens tomorrow and roughly at what time it happens, right? So, and look, it was extension 238 that had one issue and extension 208. And you know what else is interesting about it is both phone calls were with an external party. Nobody in this list complained that when I call Bob over there that it was a bad phone call. That also tells me something. My network could be, for example, in good shape, but then my gateway is the bottleneck. And so only external calls coming in are a problem. It could be a number of different things. I'm not jumping to conclusions. I'm just saying that that's interesting information, right? So at the moment, I've got kind of a time of day correlation going on. Same people often involved. You can only do that over a period of time. But I say careful with this one because if Judy in HR complains a lot, 20 times a day that there's a problem, it could be a lot of different things. One, she could be more discerning, right? She's pickier about her phone call, simple as that. So she detects the problems more than other people. Here's the real key. She could be on the phone more than other people. If I'm on the phone 5 times a day, she's on the phone 20 times in the morning alone, then she doesn't necessarily get more bad calls than I do, but she discerns that they're bad calls, and she has so many more calls in general than I do that of course she has more, right? But it's the same percentage of bad calls. And maybe it's at the same time of the day, right? And I'm never on the phone at 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, say. Okay, are the people involved geographically related? These are just some keys, just some fun stuff to throw around in your head. Take a screen cap of it if you're trying to get to a problem later today. Are they geographically related? Are they in the same area as each other? Maybe we've got a building wiring fault in that area. Maybe we're all on the same switch and the switch is starting to fail. That's interesting, right? If they're in completely different places in the office, they don't really have anything at all in common, then you can rule that one out, right? Do they use the same kind of phones? And how do they use the phones, right? So same model of phone roughly, or one's on a soft phone, one's on a hard phone. I love it when I see things are diverse because it tells me it isn't a specific model, or it's not the customer's PCs or something, or a virus program that's on the PC because all the soft phones are failing. No, if they're failing across the board, that's a more interesting problem, right? Very likely network related, and that can kind of rule out the end devices. And how do they use the phones? Again, are they on speakerphone all the time? Are they on headsets? Are the headsets poor quality, right? If it's a laptop and you get a headset and that headset isn't a USB headset, throw it out. Like even the Apple one, don't throw it out. It's good to use with your phone. It's not good to use with your PC because the sound cards in PC are junky. And the PCs, as they get smaller, these laptops get smaller, the components are even closer to each other, increasing the electromagnetic interference. And inevitably, they sound bad. So you plug a USB headset into it, which does all the processing in the headset itself, converts it to data, and then sends it to the PC. Generally speaking, you get great results, right? But that matters, right? So we want to know every detail. So I'm going to give you a little bit of direction here. This is some direction. Again, as you know, like all these sessions will be recorded and put online, made available to you so you can review it again. But this is just some direction that came off the top of my head, some common symptoms and the likely causes. And again, we're going to get into more detail as to the actual tools and how you figure this stuff out in the next session. But just for fun, in the meantime, if you've got echo, which is just typically you hear your own voice, but a bit of a delay, sort of what's called side talk, but it's delayed, the likely cause is high latency. So the packet taken too far, long to get from here to the opposite side and back again. Okay, so that's usually it. And so obviously the solution, you need to lower the latency. That's complicated, but you do. You need to figure out what's slowing it down and figure out how to speed it up. Speech is garbled. I always say a cell phone in a tunnel. So the packets are either out of order or they're getting lost, which we talked about earlier on. So we need to figure out where are things getting let down? Are we swamping our own data switches so much that it's dropping packets on us? Like is it something in-house that we can do something about? Or is it our ISP? Like we can test that to find out whether the ISP is actually dropping packets instead of us, or the modem or something is dropping packets. And then lastly, we can try and test between the modem and our ITSP, right, to determine that. Speech breaks up and some's missing. Again, it's kind of packet loss, generally speaking. So again, just try and resolve your issue if it's within your realm of control, or encourage your provider to help you out. A few more: audio feedback and humming. It's almost always a handset or headset issue. This guy here, if you hear crackling, that's right there, crackle pop. See, I've got handset or headset cord. That's it. Seriously, the darn curly cord, we call it. It's the official name is curly cord, I think, because it's a curly cord. So so we would replace the curly cord, or in the case of a bad headset, replace the headset completely. If you can, go borrow a headset from a neighbor and plug it in and see if it changes anything. Inconsistent quality is usually insufficient bandwidth. So in other words, if it's certain times a day, for example, so that's inconsistent quality. It's bad between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Yes, you likely have a lot of things going on in your network then, but you need to either figure out how to enforce quality so that there's prioritization of voice, or perhaps you've got processes that run on your network on servers or so on that replicate during those times of days that you could stop that from happening to free up some of the bandwidth. There are a number of things that you can do, policies that you can, put in place on your edge device, but you need to be responsible for gatekeeping that, right? And then no audio or one-way audio, and that's usually a firewall. So, and it can happen at the oddest of times. It can happen midway through a phone call. You think, well, if the firewall permitted it in 1 second, why wouldn't it the next second? But they're very intelligent nowadays. So in general, whenever audio goes missing in one direction or the other, it's a firewall. The question is whose? Is it your firewall? Is it, if you have a remote worker who's this is happening to, is it theirs at their house? There's a lot of pieces in that picture, going back to drawing a detailed picture. There are a lot of pieces where it could happen, but the point is it's generally a firewall. All right, so my overall advice, I realize I'm keeping you over, I apologize. And these are easier said than done, I understand that, I don't want to sound naive. Have adequate bandwidth and a quality router that's got options. Don't get crazy to options where you don't even know what they do, but you want a quality router. I'm surprised at the number of sort of home grade routers that you see at companies, at small, medium-sized businesses. $500 honestly buys you a good router with decent options. So honestly, by all means, spend something on a decent router that will give you some QoS and some tools. Okay, better if it does port mirroring and things like that. And I mean, that's not expensive either, but that will help you troubleshoot your VoIP problems in the future, right? So good if it has that feature. Secondly, choose a suitable codec. So we didn't go into great detail on that, and we will again in the next session. But that just simply means if we have very low bandwidth, find a codec that doesn't require a lot of overhead. Find a codec like G729 that's 8K versus 711 that's 64K. So one of them is obviously a much larger payload. Stay with one technology from start to finish. And this one here is a lesser known piece of advice. So this might have real value to you because you won't hear it from very many people. I think it's just overlooked, but most of us in telephony know this. VoIP handsets to the PBX and then out an analog line are often bad. It introduces echo. It doesn't sound very good. I'm telling you that's the truth. I could get into why that happens, but it's not about to get any better. And frankly, because analog lines are kind of a dying breed anyway, I can't imagine anybody working on that problem. Analog handsets to PBX to VoIP, just fine, right? Because the PBX seems to do a very good job of handling the analog handset. VoIP handsets to a PBX, right? So your phone system, just for those who forget, to VoIP lines are fine, or a PRI, because digital to digital works perfectly. They're not transcoding over and over and over again. And then lastly, analog handsets to a PBX to analog lines work well as well. All right, so that simply means a normal handset to the PBX, out your good old plain old, your POTS lines, your plain old telephone system lines work great. And then lastly, work with a provider who's, work with a provider who's committed to working with you. Okay, so work with, if you've got, I'm not going to name them. I actually almost slipped there. There are a few bargain providers online, which are, fine on a sunny day for sure. But if there's a problem, you do get what you pay for. So you're not paying much per month, but if there's a problem, you're literally dunging through help files or calling your friend, or I can't tell you the number of calls that I get from people who I know personally or friends of mine who own IT companies asking me if I can consult on something that's going on for one of their customers. And it's because their customers have one of these sort of self-serve options, if you will, and they throw their hands up. And of course, the IT company doesn't know how to help them either. Okay, I'm just saying, I'm not threatening you, and I'm not saying that you should go and pay too much for your service, not at all. But do consider that you want to work with somebody who will work with you when there's a problem. And there, the usual thank you screen. So folks, I kept you 7 minutes late. I apologize for that, but you know what? In light of that, I'm gonna I'll leave her open for another 3 minutes or so. If you want to use the chat window, I'm very happy to take questions from you. And if I could implore your patience for 1 second, I'm not a Zoom expert, but what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get here it is. There is a questionnaire. Polls. There we go. And I'm going to launch the polling. There we go. Allow the panelists to vote. Launch polling. First time I've ever done that. So there's a poll going out to you as well. It's just a questionnaire, how we're doing. Please take your time to fill it out if you don't mind. So, and again, I'll be happy to take chats if you're interested. Notes, no, sorry. So good at this. All right. Here we go. There's the chat. A friend might be purchasing a company that has VoIP support. Where can I learn VoIP from scratch? Does Digitcom offer a course, and how much is it? You could come work for us for a bit. So we train if you're a real smart guy. No, you know what? We don't. But that isn't to say that we can't be that we can't educate you. As we come out to help you on various different problems, we will keep doing these. So we're going to do, hey, you're in Toronto, Canada, unemployed and looking for work. That's fantastic, Steve. And you got a good sense of humor too. I like it. So that's not that crazy. I may contact you afterwards, but yes, we do. We have to educate those who Jake Brar. You guys need Digitcom certification courses. That's very nice. So anyhow, yeah, we don't actually sort of offer courses like that, but like I said, we do offer a lot of these sorts of things, and we offer a lot of IP office type stuff. So if you've got a skill set that complements, though, in all seriousness, I will pass your email address right there onto HR. So let me get that right now. There we go, and I'll pass it on to HR. Are there any other There we go. I just paste it into this window over here. Very good. Yeah, because Lord only knows when I close this thing down, I think the chat's gone. Any other questions, folks, that you have? Jag, everything good? Any insight into VoIP trading turrets? No, no insight at all, man. No insight at all. It's a neat concept though, isn't it? All right, guys. And Jag too, we could always take that offline if you want to chat. Like, you remember, my extension is 238, so you're always welcome. Give me a shout. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much. Again, sorry for the extra 10. It's a huge topic. I could talk for 6 hours on it, I'm sure, without breaking a sweat. So let's meet up again in a couple weeks. I appreciate your time.